like when you think about what we call civilization, to be civilized is kind of a domestication program for wild humans to be able to operate together at larger than tribal scale.
Yeah,
right?
Makes sense.
And that for hundreds of thousands of years, we never got tribes bigger than about 150 people. They stayed at very small scales where everybody knew everybody, so that the sacrifices you made for others were non-anonymous people. They were people that you knew really well, and that you wouldn't do that at much larger sizes. And so then the much larger thing, the thing we call civilization, you can also be thought of as a domestication program. Huh. And the main things you have to domesticate out of people that make them not work together well have to do with sex and violence. And so this is also where most of the psychological shadow comes. And it's why the intersection of sex and violence is the deepest part of most people's psychological shadow. Oh. They're kind of put into the same areas. But if you think about what institutional monogamy occurring with that context, like one of the things that it was designed, or a few of the things designed to do, if you couldn't have sex until getting married and then you weren't allowed to divorce, and that was actually held, and of course no system will be perfectly held, but like just the idea, then in order to get laid, a guy had to get a girl's parents and preacher and community to decide that he was an acceptable husband and father. And the binding of his ability to get laid to his ability to be a good father long term meant that there was an incentive for him to actually be a good guy long term, and that there was a vetting beyond her who might have already got oxytocin and not be, assessing him well because of the crush, that the father and the mother and the whatever would also be helping to assess to grant the right to do the thing. And then in the wedding ceremony, does anyone object? If he had been an asshole to other people and they got to bring that up, so he has to be an asshole to nobody, otherwise he's never going to get laid. Then this would also be even where the slut shaming came, which is such a terrible thing in our modern context. But I was coming to understand where like a possible evolutionary relevance of it was. Was that if any women would start to have sex with guys outside of the marriage context, which would mean that assholes could get laid, it creates an evolutionary niche for assholes to actually be able to make it. And then those guys figure out how to get more women to do that thing. And so the idea was almost like herd immunity. The idea was a collectivist idea. You actually have to close the niche for assholes comprehensively. If you want a civilization to go well, guys are going to do what they need to do to get laid. So if you bind the opportunity to get laid to being a good citizen with multiple people vetting it, that's a good system. It's actually interesting, right? Like most people, myself included, who kind of grew up in a more post-sexual revolution, liberated idea, thought of that as just oppressive nonsense. Right. And then I'm like, oh, that's actually interesting. So then the idea was that with birth control, you kind of have a sexual revolution. It seems like it's liberating for women in particular because you decouple sex and reproduction for the first time. Right. Where historically you could never really decouple sex and reproduction. Then the idea that after that, there was more of an evolutionary niche where assholes could get well laid as a result of that, and that actually has a culturally damaging property. So if you want to go the convention of marriage, if you want to not drop to pre-conventional developmentally, meaning more selfish than the convention, but go to truly post-conventional, the post-conventional has to be, okay, well, how do the individuals have more freedom than the institution of marriage to make that choice while still paying attention to not creating niches for bad behavior to be able to propagate? Like, just an interesting topic. Even if you look at the multi-male, multi-female earlier mating systems, you'd call polyamorous mating systems, like the ones that Sex at Dawn talks about, the Maswa or the Canela people or whatever. The modern interpretation of them, oftentimes the people who are proponents for it are failing to recognize that they had a completely different social system that made that adaptive, that also included a different economic system, right? So you have multi-male, multi-female mating, but the whole tribe raised all the kids. The woman wasn't left as a single mom because she lived with her family, not with her primary, not with the partner that inseminated her. All of the fathers, because there was low paternity certainty, all of the fathers were contributing to all of the kids. You actually didn't have a primarily private property-based system, but commons-based system. So like you can't extract that one part from the whole rest of it and have it work, right? So obviously that system could only be adaptive within that context.